Well, my neighbor just dropped off this. He just picked this up off Facebook Marketplace. It's an old Lincoln Welder generator powered by, it looks like a Briggs & Stratton 16 horsepower engine. We don't know much about it other than the guy said it ran when he parked it. So it sat for about 3 years outside, unfortunately. The starter is removed and we don't have the starter, so right now we're trying to locate a starter for it. But before I go into anything else, I just pulled out all these screws. We're gonna pull this cover off and see what's going on the inside, because if the inside's all like chewed up or ruined, there's no point going any further. So we're gonna pop this cover off and see what is going on underneath. All right, here's a close-up look at what we're faced with. We have, it looks like mud daubers inside there, maybe a mouse house there, which unfortunately the mouse urine is kind of rusts out the bottom. This is a little loose. The wires appear so far, they actually look okay. So it doesn't look like the mice actually chewed anything. They were just living in here. So, all right, not too bad. All right, I'm going to get to cleaning, and I will bring you back after we get some of this stuff cleaned out. See what it looks like. All right, I've removed all the mouse houses. It cleaned up pretty good. It's a little rusty inside here. This panel, the fan shroud panel, is a little loose, so that might need to get some work done on that. Well, we're gonna have to see. But before we do any of that, gotta make sure that the motor's gonna run and make sure that the actual welder part works. So I have the starter on order. Hopefully it'll be the right one. And as for right now, I'm going to come over here. I can put this rope around this pulley here, and I can kind of pull start it. So I want to check for sparks. So I have my spark tester and a rope. So I'm going to do that real quick and see if there is actually spark with this thing. Okay, so we definitely have spark, which is an excellent sign. I'm going to give this a try. I don't know if it's worth it or not. I'm going to take a little bit of starting fluid, shoot it in there, and do the old pull start and see if this thing pops off. I don't really feel like waiting for the starter, and I'm just curious. So we're going to see what happens. Wow, that popped off on the first pull. I'm going to get some gas into this tank, and I'm not even going to take the carburetor apart. I'm just going to put a little bit of gas in there and see what happens. I'm probably going to have to change this fuel line here because this fuel line's hard as a rock. So I'll look into that, and I'm going to check the oil before I do anything else. All right, it's trying to start, but I don't think it has enough fuel. I don't know if the fuel's even getting into the carb. I'm going to do a little more experimenting here. I might pull this out to see if the bowl's even filling up. Most likely I'm gonna have to take this carb out and clean it anyway, so I might just do that while I'm waiting for the starter, because it kind of sucks having to try to hand pull start this thing. So the carb was filled with some water and junk. It was pretty messed up inside. The problem was that the main jet is stripped out. Somebody had already stripped the little brass cut in there for the screwdriver, so that's no good. Of course, the gaskets are bad. I cleaned it up the best I could, and I have it back together, but it appears that it's sticking and dripping. So I'm probably just going to get a new carb for this anyway. They're pretty cheap, but just for the heck of it, I'm going to try to pull it a couple times and see if it'll fire off and run off of its own fuel now that there's not any water in it. Alright, I am happy with that. Got the engine running off the old leaky carb. And at first, it was idling and I wasn't getting any voltage out of the front here. I revved it up, and then I actually was getting about 110 volts on the outlet. Plugged in an angle grinder, it did run. It didn't seem to be regulating its idle speed with the automatic idle or high idle. But I realized I didn't hook the linkage back up. So this linkage here runs to that electronic circuit to control. So we'll have to try it again with that. But overall, I'm happy that at least we know that voltage is coming out of both the outlets and over here. And we know that the engine runs. So it looks like we're going pretty good. Don't know if I'm going to break this up into multiple videos. Might just be one. So we'll see what happens once the new carb and the new starter show up. Alright, I've repaired this wire coming out of the stator. So I'm going to just tuck that out of the way for now. The holes where the starter mounts, the back holes look pretty dirty, so I'm going to actually squirt some PB in here, and I'm going to re-tap the holes to make sure the threads are all good before I try to get the starter installed. All right, the starter's all bolted up. I got to do some work with these. This piece here looks like it's bent. I think it's supposed to bolt up to these holes, but I'll get to that later. To start out though, the next thing I need to do, there's supposed to be a strap to support the rear of the starter. I'm just going to use the plumbing strap with all the holes in it. I'm going to find a couple 1/4-20 bolts to go in those holes. All right, we're not getting any juice at the starter switch, so I'm going to do a little testing here. We're going to see if there's any power in different spots here. I did have this off and I cleaned the terminals because I switched these cables, but these are pretty cruddy too, so I don't know if they're not looking good either. So let me do some testing here and we'll see if we got any power anywhere. No power on this side, which kind of makes sense because the solenoid's not tripped. Alright, I just did some testing with the multimeter here to see what's going on, why the starter isn't getting any juice. So my positive from my battery is coming and connecting to the one side of the solenoid. The other side of the solenoid goes to the starter. We do not have any juice. Well, this is loose. Let me... Could that, let's check that. Okay, that wasn't it. Let me trace some wires here and see where these wires are going. We have one jumper going from the hot terminal to this terminal. We have a wire going to the other side, and this one's by itself. I kind of think this is the signal wire. I'm going to get a 12-volt test light and do some probing and see what's going on here. All right, where we left off, I was trying to get this thing to start with no success. Turns out the solenoid was bad. It was all rusty and corroded, so I wasn't too surprised. What was surprising was when we bought this new solenoid that looked identical and matched the old one, it still didn't work. My friend who owns this welder stopped by, and between the two of us, we were able to run some tests with some different voltmeters to see what all these wires go to. We traced the wires. This large wire is the main power basically to go to the amp meter, and this is our signal wire. What was unique about this though was it wasn't a positive signal, it's a ground signal. This, the one that we bought, the solenoid, was grounded internally through the bracket itself, but the welder has isolators to insulate that from ground. So my neighbor, he took this home, he ground the rivets off, popped it open, and sure enough there was a ground wire running to this bracket. So he removed the ground wire, and then I forget exactly what he said, he had to switch one of the wires around inside here. But now he basically converted this to the insulated style solenoid, which is what this machine needs. So now I'm going to get this thing all hooked back up how it should be, exactly how it was, and this thing should work. Alright, we have the solenoid installed, all the wires are hooked back up. I'm going to throw the positive lead onto the battery here. And if we come over here, make sure our run switch is on. Now when I hit this start button, starter should come to life here. Here we go. So the solenoid is fixed, the starter is fixed. Next thing on the agenda, should be pretty easy, just swapping out this new carb. Alright, carburetor is installed. I got the linkage hooked back up. The linkage is a little bit wonky. I'm expecting it to need some adjustment. The way that I read that this works, this is an electromagnet here. This controls your high idle. The governor should control, you know, its normal position in idle and run, but this should suck it in. I think if this sucks it in for low idle, when it releases, the governor takes over and regulates it to, should be 3600 RPM. So we're going to throw the choke on. I got the fuel on, and we're going to see where this Chinesium carburetor is set. Alright, she does run. I'm going to have to do some work on adjusting the solenoid for the, I think it's called automatic idle and high idle. I'm going to have to figure out how that gets worked out. I messed with this a little bit up top. That kind of adjusts your high idle, I guess. So I'm going to work on that. And then once we get some adapters here for our leads, we'll give her a shot, see if she welds. Alright, I've gotten the carburetor set with this throttle stop here so that at full high idle I'm getting 115 to 120 volts out of these outlets. So the next thing I'm going to try to do, I have some adapters on here. I'm going to hook up some welding leads to this. I'm going to fire her up and let's see if she'll weld. Progress is being made with this machine. What was happening, I had it running and it would run fine. It would pick up the high idle and then it would act as if it was starving from fuel and it would shut itself off. I took the cap off of the fuel tank and shined a flashlight in there, and there was actually little bits of rust caught in the petcock valve. So I was able to blow some compressed air through. I think some trash may be in this carb, because even after I did that, it was running much better, but it still was hanging up a little bit. It wasn't running as good as it should be. So I was able to, while it was running, to actually fire up, do a couple welds. They're not the greatest, but, you know, it does work. So all the functions of the machine are now proven. So we now know that the automatic idler function works. We know that the machine welds. The generator is putting out the correct voltage. So I'm pretty happy with it. I'm going to have to pull this carburetor apart one more time, clean everything, and then do a readjust. So that might be in a future video, but for now I'm just going to wrap this one up. If you guys like this, consider subscribing and check me out on the next video. Thanks for watching.